he thought he trapped a silent puppet in a gilded cage. He had no idea she was the one who wired the explosives, and his biggest rival was holding the detonator. Moat watched my husband buy a $1 penthouse for his mistress while Moat sat in the shadows, holding the sonogram of the twins he'd never meet. He thought Moat was a fragile housewife trapped in a gilded cage of his making, a silent puppet to his ego. He didn't know Mort had already replaced the bars with explosives and handed the detonator to the one man he truly feared. Never underestimate a woman who holds all the receipts. Watch the ultimate masterclass in revenge now. The atmosphere inside the Aurelian was not merely expensive. It was oppressive with the weight of old, cold money. Victor Blackwood, a man who had built the Blackwood empire on the ruins of his competitors, felt a familiar surge of omnipotence. Beside him sat Serena Jade, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and artificial as a diamond-tipped drill. She was draped in silk that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, her laughter a practiced, melodic chime that echoed against the rust-gold-leafed ceilings. To Victor, she was the ultimate accessory, a secret ornamental flourish to his life of curated perfection. Victor surveyed the room with the eyes of a predator. He believed in the tangible, the weight of a Patek Philippe on his wrist, the growl of a customized engine, and the absolute submission of everyone in his orbit. His wife, Isabella, had been the foundation of this life, the woman of respectable lineage who had provided the social grace he lacked. But lately, Isabella had become distant, her mind occupied by the nursery colors and prenatal vitamins of her pregnancy. Victor viewed his affair with Serena as a necessity, a pressure valve for a man of his stature, believing Isabella was too distracted, too fragile, to ever notice the rot beneath the floorboards of their marriage. But as Victor raised a glass of vintage cognac to toast his own brilliance, his gaze snagged on a private alcove draped in velvet. There, bathed in the soft amber glow of a table lamp, sat Isabella. She looked radiant, far from the exhausted woman he had left at their estate. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue that accentuated her pregnancy, but it was her expression that froze the blood in Victor's veins. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the man across from her with an intelligence and wit Victor hadn't seen in years. That man was Alistair Draken, the CEO of Draken Holdings, a phantom of the financial world and the only man Victor feared. The world Victor had so carefully constructed didn't just tilt. It began to shatter into a million razor-sharp pieces. Isabella Blackwood was never just a cultural attaché or a decorative wife, though Victor had spent years trying to convince her she was. Before she was the CEO of their life, she had been a world-class forensic analyst for the international art market, a woman who could spot a forgery in a heartbeat. When Victor had systematically erased her career, she had allowed him to believe he had won. She had played the part of the preoccupied pregnant wife flawlessly, all while she was quietly laying the foundation for a fortress of her own. The first crack in Victor's facade hadn't been a lipstick stain. It was a charge on a credit card statement for a hotel in West Hollywood when he claimed to be in San Diego. Isabella didn't confront him. She didn't cry. Instead, she investigated with the cold, meticulous precision of a chess grandmaster. Using a shared family tablet, she had uncovered a hidden photo album titled Architectural Surveys, a gallery of Victor's infidelity with Serena Jade. She saw Serena posing in his car, wearing the diamond necklace Victor had claimed was a gift for a client. Looking at those images, Isabella didn't feel jealousy. She felt a profound, clarifying rage. Victor hadn't just broken a vow. He had insulted her intelligence. She knew that a direct confrontation would only lead to gaslighting and false promises. Victor would call her hormonal and crazy. So, she decided he would just be punished. he would be dismantled. She turned her sharp analytical mind toward his empire, documenting every discrepancy and every fraudulent conveyance of marital assets. She realized Victor was the disease, and she was the only one with the cure. She needed a partner who had the capital and the cruelty to match her own. Alistair Draken was that man. The call to Alistair Draken was the hardest thing Isabella had ever done, an admission that her marriage was a failure. But when he answered, she was all business. She didn't offer a sob story. She offered a business proposal involving significant capital and a mutual acquaintance. Alistair, who had always respected her mind, listened without interruption. He didn't offer pity, he offered respect. He saw Victor for what he was, a fool joy riding a cheap motorcycle while a Lamborghini sat in his garage. Together, they spent 6 weeks assembling an army. While Victor was sneaking around with Serena, Isabella was paying the retainers for a team of the city's best financial investigators. She wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to start an art advisory firm that would compete directly with Victor's interests. She secured the seed investment from Draken Holdings before she ever declared war. The firm would be called Draken Blackwood Art Advisory, a final ironic twist of the knife. Isabella's plan was a piece of performance art designed for an audience of one. She had arranged for Victor to be at the Aurelian that night. She had used a promotional offer sent to an account she controlled, ensuring Victor saw it on her laptop. Knowing his ego and his desire to impress his new plaything, she knew he wouldn't be able to resist taking the bait. She wanted him to see her with Alistair. She wanted him to stew in the poison of his own assumptions. As she sat in the velvet alcove, the official kickoff of their new venture was tea, just a dinner. It was the opening salvo of a dangerous game where she held all the high cards. Victor's approach to the table was a predictable chemical reaction. He moved with the rigid posture of a man whose authority had been challenged, planting his hands on the table in an overt act of intimidation. He ignored Alistair and growled at Isabella. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Isabella didn't flinch. She placed her fork down with the serene, unshakable calm of a queen. "Moat met having dinner, Victor," she replied coolly. "You should try it sometime, preferably with your own wife." The barb hit its mark, and Victor's face cycled through shock, denial, and finally cornered fury. He tried to use the pregnancy against her, calling her hormonal and paranoid, telling her to go home and rest. But before he could touch her, Alistair Draken moved. Without raising his voice, Alistair placed his hand flat on the table, an action that sucked all the air out of the room. "Victor," Alistair said in the chillingly calm tone of a man who could bankrupt countries, "Isabella is not going anywhere." Then Isabella delivered the first bomb. She complimented Serena's necklace, noting it was from the Graf Spring collection. She then laid out the facts: the suite at the Pendry, the polo match in Greenwich, and the endless charges at florists. She told him, "You're not a master spy, Victor. You're just a common cheat who happens to have a high credit limit." The fantasy for Serena began to dissolve as she realized she was just a sideshow. Isabella ended the encounter with a final devastating blow. Her lawyer, the Black Widow, would be contacting his in the morning with divorce filings and a forensic accounting team. Victor stood there, a fool in a well-tailored suit, as his world was systematically ground into dust. The morning after the dinner, a Category 5 hurricane made landfall over Victor's life. He woke up to find his personal accounts locked and a court order barring him from any unusual corporate transactions. He had been neutered before he could even call his CFO. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page character assassination, detailing the shell corporation Victor had used to siphon funds, a roadmap provided by Isabella's team. The headline, "Blackwood's Tarnished Empire," was a stiletto to the heart. Inside the Blackwood Tower, the stock value had been halved, and the company was facing shareholder lawsuits. Victor walked through the lobby like a ghost, his employees scurrying past, him with their eyes on the floor. In the boardroom, the men he had shared cigars with looked at him with the cold appraisal of butchers. They exercised the morals clause in his contract, citing conduct that brings the company into public disrepute. Victor was surgically excised from his own legacy, escorted out of the building with a single box of his personal items. As he stood on the pavement, his credit cards were the next to go. He tried to order a defiant breakfast, only to see payment failed flash on his screen, like a small electronic slap in the face. He was a billionaire on paper, but he couldn't afford a bagel. He began to leave pathetic whimpering voicemails for Isabella, begging her to think of the baby, but his words vanished into a digital void. Isabella was no longer his wife. She was a digital wall he could not breach. Isabella didn't just take Victor's money, she took his very name. She launched her firm as Draken Blackwood, forever linking his legacy to his rivals as a mark of his defeat. Victor was forced to watch from a dark, silent apartment as the world embraced Isabella as the phoenix of finance. Serena Jade, realizing the ship was sinking, had already moved on, leaving her Graf necklace on a restaurant table as a parting insult. She told him he was pathetic, and she was right. Victor became irrelevant. A cautionary tale whispered about at the galas he used to rule. He spent his days in a paranoid haze, pacing the vast expanses of his home like a caged animal. Every news notification was a new pinprick to his deflated ego. He saw photos of Isabella in sleek glass-walled conference rooms, looking vibrant and powerful. She wasn't hiding or waiting for his apologies. She was painting a whole new masterpiece and signing her own name to it. The most crushing blow came when Victor saw a professionally shot photograph of Isabella in her new gallery. She was regal and utterly serene, with her hand resting protectively on her stomach. She had reclaimed her identity and built an empire from the ashes of his betrayal. Victor finally understood the profound, absolute, and irrevocable nature of true bankruptcy. He hadn't just lost a company, he had lost the one thing that mattered. He was a disgraced prefix to her glorious new chapter, a footnote in the story of her spectacular rise. Isabella's new firm, Draken Blackwood Art Advisory, wasn't just a business, it was a declaration of independence. She chose her team based on talent, not loyalty, a direct jab at Victor's style of cronyism. She was no longer an accessory he acquired to complete a picture. She was the artist. She told Alistair that Victor had only taken what she was willing to give, and now she was building something that no one can ever take away. The raw space of her new loft in Chelsea, with its exposed brick and vast industrial windows, represented the promise of a clean slate. Isabella felt a profound and somber sense of release. The public detonation at the restaurant had been an ugly step, but it was a necessary one. She was no longer defined by the gilded cage or the prison of luxury. Victor had built brick by shiny, expensive brick. She was alive again, her mind firing on all cylinders. As she prepared for her first private auction, Isabella looked out at the gray Manhattan sky and saw only potential. She was raising her children in a world where integrity was the standard, not a liability. She had orchestrated a coup that was a masterclass in strategy, proving that the most powerful move is often the one your opponent never sees coming. She had turned her betrayal into a blueprint for a future where she was the sole proprietor of her own destiny. The story of the Blackwoods ended not with a bang, but with a deep, resonant silence. Victor remained in the ruins of the gilded cage, a ghost from a past life. Isabella, however, became the new standard in the market. She proved that true strength isn't about control and dominance. It's about resilience, intelligence, and the courage to rebuild. Her name was no longer a shadow of Victor's. It was the keystone of a new dynasty. In the end, Victor Sterling's failure was one of underestimation. He saw his wife as a beautiful passive part of his portfolio, failing to see the brilliant strategic mind he had tried so hard to sideline. He believed his power was absolute, but he learned that it was as fragile as the lies it was built upon. Isabella had reclaimed her name and her future, leaving Victor to stare at a framed photo of their wedding, a relic from a life that no longer existed. Isabella's final victory was not in the ruining of him, but in making his life look small in comparison to hers. She had broken the frame and painted a whole new masterpiece. As she stood in her gallery, a queen in her new kingdom, the world finally understood. The most dangerous person in the room is not the one with the loudest voice, but the one who has been quietly laying the foundation for your replacement while you were too busy admiring your own reflection. Conclusion and lesson learned. The story of Victor and Isabella Blackwood provides a chilling and profound analysis of the consequences of hubris and the transformative power of strategic resilience. Victor's downfall was not triggered by a single mistake, but by a systemic failure to recognize the inherent value and intelligence of the woman he considered a mere asset in his life's portfolio. The central lesson is that power built on the subjugation and underestimation of others is inherently unstable. It creates the very forensic eyes that will eventually catalog its corruption. Isabella's journey from a silent puppet to the architect of her own liberation illustrates that the most effective form of justice is not emotional retaliation, but the cold, methodical reclamation of one's identity and agency. It teaches us that integrity is not a hormonal vulnerability, but a formidable weapon that, when paired with intelligence, can dismantle even the most invincible empires. Ultimately, the story warns that those who believe they can curate the lives of others like pieces of art often find themselves rendered as mere footnotes in the much larger, more brilliant masterpieces created by those they tried to silence. True legacy is not inherited or stolen. It is built on the bedrock of truth, and those who weaponize deceit will eventually find themselves bankrupt in the only currency that matters: respect.